Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back here with our guest today, Vaughn Davis Jr. Thank you for watching, tuning in. I hope you're enjoying this Twitch experience. If you are, you can support the channel by clicking that follow button for free. We're going to get back into our conversation here with the friends. Y'all, welcome back. Hope you had a good break.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great
You
break.
too.
Thanks a lot.
10 minutes flies by on these breaks for us, for sure.
It does.
But it's a nice stopping, nice place to kind of find ourselves and reapproach the conversation. So in this part of the show, we like to focus in on the artist's work, and on that note, there's a little blurb from Vaughn's show, Schisms at Romer Young Gallery, that I'd like to read, and then we can go into some of the viewing. Uh, it's quoted, "Since its inception, my painting practice has turned itself through me as a composition of systematic cuts and imprecise colors. These systems are predicated upon the dismantlement of the picture plane and the deconstruction of the painting process. Through the process, I create objects of madness. It's an inherited chaos through their occupation in this time. Each canvas is multiple expressions within itself: splatter, spill, die, tear, fray, to become a powerful chronicle of our time." So we're looking at some of the slides here. You can see some of that work behind Vaughn as well.
Like picture in picture. That's great.
Yeah.
It looks like is the. Oh no! Okay, I can see it. I can see it. So yeah, we have these slides here. I think a great place to start would just be, Vaughn, if you could tell us how this show came to be. Give us some history, and
hmm
I met both Joey and Vanessa at different times in preparation for the show, and they're amazing people. But I think I would like to know, and our audience would like to know, kind of the inception of this show, and then we can talk about some of the work in it.
Great. Yeah. This show came about just through some great communication, which is really awesome. This show came through COVID as well. Which was
Mm-hmm.
a really different show. I mean, this is a really different experience for both the gallery and myself here because for the first time for me, I'm so hands-on with my practice. Typically, I'm always there to install.
Mm-hmm.
Being so much for so long on a local level in my practice, or being able to travel with my work, just generally being able to travel with the work to facilitate installation of the work. This work is so tactile; it's always changed, and it's always something different every time it's installed or every time it's being re-seen. There's some of these things are irreplicable when I'm for the installation. So this show was again very different.
Mm-hmm.
For that reason, there was a lot of digital communication on the behalf of us, attempting to put this show together, which is really interesting. Because I think we made a interesting show as far as the work compiled. Like it was really cool because Joy and Vanessa, they were here with me like the entire time this work was being made. So there's this process of like since the inception of these paintings, it's just the inception of these paintings, they were here to kind of say and like see the work as it moved around in the studio. So
So,
that was cool.
so are you
So
saying you
that's not
made
this.
you made these works for this show?
Yeah, so a lot of these works were made for the show.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of these works were made for this show, which is really cool. And there's some works that are not in the show that are like only seen digital. Right
Mm.
now, there are more works on there, and those can be seen on Artsy as well. So that'll be a cool way for people to see the rest of that work.
Is that a
Yeah.
practice that you've been engaged in with previous shows? I think for Ascending Forms at Coca, that work was
hmm
also made for your solo there. Is that something that you do on a regular basis?
Very similarly, yeah, I really enjoy the idea of some kind of specificity as far as the work is concerned.
Mm.
That's really important for I think my practice. I think that's really important for me to engage this other aspect of my work, which is that barrier between painting and sculpture, that barrier that is between the way I literally practice painting. For me, painting is no longer on the square I've decided to take these things off of the square. So now what's left is this fabric-like tattered but painted object. These things are totally still paintings, but it's about that deconstruction of the process and that use of the D. It's like the undoing of specific parts of the painting practice.
Mm. And this word schisms, where did that come up in the process?
Yeah, so schisms is kind of it's this other iteration I've been using. I've been wanting to use vocabulary that is around the practice itself, or like around the process itself.
Mm-hmm.
So schisms is this idea of this like division. It's like you're like kind of like at faults, or like it's like a part of a battle of some kind. So I wanted to completely talk about in this work as well, this like division of the space, these division of these cuts and these lines in the canvases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to slip.
Yeah, and I mean, I just looked up the definition real quick. A split or division between strongly opposed sections or parties. I mean, I mean, if
Literal,
that's not
right?
that, or, we're not all experiencing that in so many different ways. I think that's
Yeah,
incredible.
it's literal and conceptual at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and with these works here, we can almost we can almost see that. Excuse me. We can almost see the kind of like what would be considered this square that you refer to, what you consider this rectangle. Actually, like, we can almost piece these works back together to that form. Like there's a little bit of this energy for me looking at these works to understand how they go back in time as well into finding these rectangular forms, versus like the first images that we looked at. I guess the long one, the one that's directly behind you, the very elongated piece, doesn't have its nature kind of originally set at like a painting scale or like as a rectangle or something that you'd ever see.
Mm-hmm.
But in these, can really feel the rhythm of like what it could have been if the interventions weren't the same, or if the interventions weren't there, that they can like reform in the past to these rectangles, but maybe not.
That's a good observation, actually, Rick. Yeah, because part of the work is that the work is divided. I've never subtracted any part of the canvas from any of these canvases. So in theory, the viewer, with your eyes, you could put those works back together. If you lay them flat on the ground, or if they were sewn together or remended, they would be in the original square that it came off of. Which is definitely always been part of the iteration of this practice, is like, how do I keep it whole, but I want to expand. I wanted to make larger work, and I was trying to figure out a way also, like, if you make a 10 by 10 painting on a square, the implications of that versus the implications of something else, of this fabric-like object is much different. So yeah, it's part of its expansion.
And that hasn't always been a part of the practice. Like, for instance, at Ascending Forms, those were removed from their squareness, right? Yeah. So is that something that's specific to this show, or more specific and relevant to your current practice?
Yeah, I think it's kind of been throughout parts of the practice, back and forth quite a lot. Yeah, I think it's always been back and forth quite a lot with that, because see, in the piece that's behind you now, Rick, that can be put back together, and it's the original the original square.
Yeah,
it's one of those.
This is one of the earlier. I think I got this from you in 2018. Does that sound like the time
right.
when you made it? Yeah, so
that was around Vienna. There was a time, I think, after I came back from the summer in Vienna, as when you picked that work up for me, because I had just came back from Vienna and I had painted in a while, because when I was living in Vienna in 2018 with Webster for my study abroad program, we were doing a lot more printmaking. It was the focus. Tom Lane was the professor. We were with him, and Brian Zimmerman as well. So there was more of a focus on site-specific sculpture. I did a lot of printmaking. I did some clay work. And I was just outside in Vienna quite a lot during that summertime, myself and the other students at Webster in the art department. So that was cool. So that painting came about after I got back. So I guess I had absorbed a lot of the the views of that town, then came back and painted that work outside in St. Louis, just in the heat of St. Louis, uh, mid-August.
In Mom's
So that was
backyard.
yes, mom's backyard making paintings.
I want to get to
Well,
that in a moment. I'm sorry, Jake. We have a
No,
pertinent
go
comment
ahead.
here in the chat. I like the colors. I know the topic is deeper than pretty, though, from Skate Mom. So, but I think that is a relevant take, right? I mean, I think that we
Yeah.
can look at these works here at Schism and recognize them as beautiful. The colors themselves are enticing. They're appealing. And I think most recently there was a while where your work, and maybe we'll show some of this, were very monochromatic. And then now with the addition of these colors that I like to think of as sometimes tropical, sometimes fruit, pineapple, oranges, beer mosa type colors, in that like I I think that these are maybe I'm out of my mind, but I think that these are very conventionally beautiful, and I'm curious to you how you kind of resolve like the meanings, kind of as we described in the intro to these works, with their beauty.
Yeah, those are a great comment. It's kind of interesting to think about these works as more than their appearance. I think that's something that I think all painters have to grapple with. I think as far as the practice is concerned overall, is the beauty in painting. I think there will always be that. I think there's always a history of painting. There's always a painter who made something more beautiful than the next painter, and the next painter will always make something more beautiful than the next. The aesthetics are undetachable with painting. So I think we always have to think about beauty and what is color, and because essentially that's painting, right? Which it's all based upon what we're putting on this flat surface. We're replicating life, or are we attempting to like redefine life through this through this painting? So I think beauty is totally there, and but I think it can be more than. I think painting can be more than beauty. At the same time, I think my work, I feel like when the work comes out of my head, I'm like, oh, this work's gonna be just like chaos. But then it ends up being this like very beautiful, like fruit-like colors, like you said, mimosa-like colors, very sunset-like colors. And I think this is a phase that the work is in right now as well, which is really interesting. There are more monochromatic works. There have been darker works I've made. So I think right now in this show, I was really inspired during this time, and I think this is like really tracking where I was at during the time of making this show. Like I think I was attempting to create a lens within this work during COVID, where it was just myself in my studio thinking about just thinking about the happiness that once was pre-COVID, and like missing all my friends and missing so many people. I was like, I have to keep myself excited in this. How am I going to make this work to keep myself happy? So I made this work. Then I sat and then I tore all the work up. All this like beauty I put into the work, all this prettiness, into the colors, I go and tear it up. And
Well, totally. Well, I think talking about that, like I had, a lot of people I think in COVID have this, like I had all these beautiful plans and now they're ripped up. I feel that experience seeing this work, and specifically like saying this, like, the idea of a schism, again, a split or division between strongly opposed sections or parties, as so says the internet. I noticed a lot of these pieces are pictured in pairs. So there's kind of these two parties that are schismed, these two sections that kind of maybe a before and an after. I could see like maybe this particular one, any of these that Rick you have up, someone could put in their brain like, this is my 2019 self and here's my post 2020 self on the right, and both can be beautiful. It is tragic what's happening and what has happened, but I think that from crisis can come opportunity. So I think this idea that I'm curious, one, are these to be taken in as two pieces at once, just as a first question, and then second, I'm curious too, like even on the install and these pieces, like kind of battling between the space of like before and after, or opposing parties in either or left right kind of situation.
Yeah, so this is an installation of my canvases. I would say I would call this. I think because the way the show was photographed and the way we wanted to pair the works next to each other as they were being photographed. That's why you see multiple in each photograph there. But yeah, I would call this an installation
Mm.
of my practice, and that's something that I'm steadily wanting to go towards. Is this idea of that the work is somehow fitting into the space and using the inspiration of a space in order to, because the works very much so are grappling with the wall and the floor of the works. I've always been really interested in that aspect of it as well. As far as the installation are concerned, the work is the pairs. But back to your comments on the pairs, that's really important to the work because I'm typically on these works, I paint on both sides of the canvas.
Mm.
So, say someone has the work in a museum or a home or a gallery, for instance, there is this added advantage of being able to see both sides. Um, so it's as if I'm making you choose which one to be seen or which side do you want to view at that time, which was really important to me. I felt like I was just being a bit indecisive when I was painting, or typically I feel like I'm indecisive when I paint. Or when I make artwork, I feel like I'm a bit indecisive. So I decided to paint both sides of the canvas in order to, yeah, lessen the decision making. Oh, cool. This is one of the works moving. Yeah, they totally move.
Fantastic. Wow. So there's even a schism inside of one piece. there's
Yeah,
there's a one side or the other, that there's these opposing parties even just on one.
yeah.
Incredible.
I like how you talk about it as being indecisive. I think that there's the um, I guess as far as terminology, I didn't catch it. Do you think of them as double-sided or reversible? How do you feel about those terminologies? Would you pick one over the other?
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think so. Are they double sided or are they reversible?
Hmm.
Huh. I'm gonna mix it up and say I need both words.
Okay.
I think the word is both words. Another schism.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think about like I loved as a child I loved reversible like track pants. Like that was a thing for a while where you'd basically get like two pants for the price of one, and they would work, either inside out or outside in, right? And then alternatively, maybe not totally um, specific to this, but those pants where you could like zip off the legs, where you could
Exactly.
uh,
They're back.
what are those?
They're back. Zip offs.
Zip offs, is that what they're
It's
called?
just yeah. I call them zip offs, but they're just now that where they zip off is just higher.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just much higher on the leg, so it's a little more fashionable
It's
when
above the
you
knee.
make it a short. Yes, it's like far above the knee usually what I've seen.
So yeah, I think about those like these convertible objects is maybe another word for it. Like these cars that can be hard bodied, or you can like take the top off. These objects that are convertible in certain ways, or reversible, or double sided. And I think that you and I have personally talked about the relation of this work to fashion, to clothing, to wearables. And I'm curious if that's something that is coming up for you as a major part of your practice, as an exploration at this point, or is that something that's taking a back seat?
Yeah, I feel like that definitely. Yeah, I think it's something that has a. I think I'm here. I think I'm here for both of those.
Mm.
I think with my practice right now, I'm really interested in I think I really want to. The way I want to take the work, I want to scale the work. I want to
Mm.
use the work in a scale that's larger than the human body would allow me to use, because I think the thing
Mm-hmm.
with fashion is that there's always the two armholes for your jacket, two pant legs for your legs. You need two pairs of shoes, two socks, and a shirt with holes, with
Mm.
like armholes and your neck hole, right? And your body, so there is such a specificity to fashion that I don't think I would right now. Yeah, there's the specificity in it. But even though there's a lot of specificity in these, there's a lot of simplicity in my work, of course. Like there is I think, but this specificity is what I'm really very much interested in right now. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
yeah,
fair. And I don't want to detract us from the conversation that we're having. It's just something
no, it's really
something that I tend
interesting.
to. Yeah, something that I tend to. I mean, like there are spaces in these paintings that you could, like in this one on the right, like imagine like putting your head through
Yeah.
that hole, or and it's probably kind of right at, view height, I would imagine,
Mhm.
that hole there. So these are interacting with the body, um, just in viewing space. But do you think that moving them into larger and larger scales will continue to distance them from, like, imposing our bodies into these works?
Yeah, it's really interesting that the question of the body. I think that's the overall topic within the work, because fashion is part of the body, which we said. I think that's really interesting that somehow we want to see faces in everything,
Mm.
right? It's like it's I think also because of the work in this to the scale that it is now, there is a sense of portraiture. I feel like there's always something that's like really interesting about how we see faces and things, like how
Mm-hmm.
we see the front of a car and we see the two headlights and the grill of a car and we see a face. So it's really interesting to play along with that, especially within this work here, especially at the angle it is. It's almost like this like abstracted portraiture.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a really interesting subject within the work, because there's a way to, I think it's because I'm relating it so clearly back to, or I think I would hope for this to be at some point in my practice where you can see my hand in this. You can see
Mm.
my hand in each work. Like I've put my body into this painting. I've like used these like large brushstrokes along the like horizontal brushstrokes on this one that we're reviewing now, um, and using that to relate it back to my body in the portraiture. Those are yeah, that's like pretty important with the practice. I feel like I'm always trying to like find different nuances in abstraction. I think that's one of the coolest parts about making being an abstract painter, is that we can always like make things like pull and push um, different concepts along with us as we paint. Because I'm a painter, and that's like how I define myself now.
The relation to the front of a vehicle resonates with me in my personal practice, and
Yeah.
how the shapes and the lines indicate like a certain personality, and people like to indicate personalities. I love the personality of a GTR, right? Like that's who,
Mm.
like, I want to be hanging out with. That's kind of how I think of you, Vaughn. You look like you're like a GTR in my world. Um, you can, it's a daily driver, great friend, but also can get on the gas when you need to.
Get on
Uh,
that.
Something I noticed with your work, and I think it might have to do with the method in which you're distressing these surfaces, is that sometimes these works, because of the lines, because of what's possible with the way they rip and tear, is these faces in these works distort, or they fall somewhere between like agony and laughter, or there's some sort of like deep expression, like it's very emotional. As some of them, I think, like my work back here, I think right now is in like a very languid state, and that's something that we consider when we reorient this work. But these here, and I'm curious how this has affected you, that if these schisms, these rips, lend themselves towards that space between like joy or like overjoy, and also like agony, and how you negotiate the emotional qualities that are a consequence of your interventions in the surface.
Yeah, I think that's the use of like the intervention is really quite that. I think to begin the work, it feels so complete at first. I feel like the when I'm painting, if we could go into a detail shot of the work, yeah, there. I think that's a really good way to. I think this is a really great image to see and to begin the how the work starts versus when by the time the work is complete and how I feel about it. Because here I'm using grit dyes, I'm using acrylics, I'm using slews of paint. I mean, I'm using just like slews of paint on this canvas. It feels really complete. You know, there's most of this work is the laughter when it's painting. Then there is a sense of agony of the mark as I tear the work. You know, it's really interesting. I was always trying to find it when I started painting these works or like making my work. I would say I really didn't know what I was doing too much. You know, I was just kind of went in there. I feel like I was really naive at the same time. I'm really early on in this practice, and I feel like I wanted to keep that with me quite wholesomely. You know, so I started to tear this work up, which is really interesting. Like I wanted to make a mark that I didn't need a paintbrush. So I typically use sponges when I paint these canvases. So that's how, or I use a water hose, you know, and I'll use that to make the work really kind of, the paint really kind of move on the canvas and like really dilute the painting. But I feel like this is off the subject of your question though.
No, that's fair. I think, you know, when we begin to look at these details, it does take us into lots of different spaces. For instance, like when we look at this, that periodelia, I think is the word for it, that wanting to see faces and objects. Here, maybe it's because we were talking about it, but it seems more resolved in its form at, you know, from this distance. But when we do enter into the work and enter into its details, then it seems like our train of thoughts more easily get lost.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that happens in abstraction, you know. I think it's one of the beauties of it.
What's the tiniest marks? What are the tiniest marks that you make?
Oh, I've made some 12 by 12-inch canvases. They're quite small, which was a very good time for me because I was able just to sketch those ideas out. You know, like only a couple of inches, maybe even like a few centimeters of a mark. Those are really nice. I do those just basically in the studio and like in this in between time. Those are my sketches. So
Really
they're working
sharp,
quite small.
really sharp X-Acto knife.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
I've never thought about a small Vaughn piece. It's always been so big and draping and you know, dramatic. And I feel like a small one would be so like. Do you sit with
Yeah.
those pieces too? Like, do you sometimes look at them and be like, I need to do a small show. I need to do a show of miniatures
Miniature
of you
show.
know, like does that speak to you too in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I think it could. You know, I think after a while, I have to build them up and let them and make many more of them because they're still really. I think I really enjoy when many small works compose a really large installation of works. I really enjoy that idea of a scale of how, you know, it reminds me of like a colony of ants or like
I
bees.
was
You know,
just
kind of
thinking
like small things
Vaughn's show
make
for
this.
ants.
Yeah, like it's like a colony of works. I really
Yes.
enjoy that idea as well. So I think that's how I would show them if they were shown. So
Well, and I always struggle too. For some reason, I always want big art. Every time I go somewhere, I want to see big art. I want to feel small in the presence of it because I spend so much time looking at art on a screen and it seems so small. But with your work, I think you're the first artist I can think of that I'm like, I'd actually be really curious to see small work. I wonder what that's about. You know, like I would really like to be able to kind of get into the small space of that. So that's here's to the colony. We'll think about that one sometime.
Yeah, and there are
totally.
tons of small spaces in these works. Something that I notice on social media is lots of people when they view your work and tag you in their stories, they're taking photos of micro moments in the work or the ways that these fibers are caught in kind of like the ambient wind of the room that they're in. You know, because like as you look closer and closer, you see that these pieces aren't static. You know, there's not like giant like shop industrial fans blowing these pieces around, but with the lightness of these spaces, you can really, they start to kind of like antenna into the rooms that they're in and kind of like have this feeling quality to them. So
Yeah, I
there's a
think
lot
it's
to
really
that.
interesting
I
that this next image here is really kind of cool because I think it really kind of speaks about that it becoming this antenna into the space.
this.
Yeah, this idea of the work
Hmm.
coming from the wall to the floor. You know, it's that merging upon what the work is, or like what the object is.
Mm-hmm.
I think this work is a lot more conscious of it being a sculpture, or being some form of a soft sculpture, or how to use how to use a word to define a painting that is unstretched. I
Mm.
think those are all of those other vocabulary words around that are really important.
Yeah, in regards to that, and to how these, remind us of forms, these works here, I think, have a lot less overt personality. I think that this work is acting more as kind of like an antenna or a thermometer. It doesn't have that same kind of like emotive laughter as the other ones. Do you agree
Yeah,
with
this
that?
work. Yeah, I think this work is interesting because when I found these works, these strip works, is like these like strips of canvas here. The format is so odd to me because
Mm.
they're only about 12 inches wide or less, but they're 100 inches long. So they're it's I was always when I found these works, it was because of an offcut of canvas that I was using in the studio. I was attempting to get this size that I was really wanting to use, and it's just kind of a very haphazard thing, which is really important to me. I think it's really important to the artist just in general. It's this idea of play and how that can turn into something that is part of your practice. This the idea of this format, this very long but very narrow painting, um, was very haphazard in that way. It was kind of found, and so now this work is like another iteration of this, and this idea of how it can um, yeah, how it can be part of the object and still be a painting. There is no overt personality in this work. I think that is because it's not as full in its entire form. It's um, yeah. I think I've kind of gotten used in a way to seeing the work in a very square format. So this is
Mm.
like work was a challenge for me, I think, which is really nice. It was this really nice challenge of how to bring the body out of this work as well, which in relation doesn't feel anything connected to it.
Mm.
I see. So in the chat here, Software for Girls really likes this idea of a colony of work. Says a colony of work is fire emote. And I wanted to bring this up here as as an expression of one of these smaller works that you had on display at Dragon Crab Turtle here in St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah, that's one of them actually. Yeah, this show was really interesting. We're gonna get to that next. But yeah, this is like one of the 12 by 12s.
Hmm.
So it
Yeah.
was one of these works that I made. So when I made these works, they were on the ground, and they were in a colony actually. So there was like a 6 by 6 form. So I had like 36 of them, and I painted all of them together. So at some point, I guess these works can be put back together, and it'll make the same square that they came from as well. So it's still formally quote unquote part of my process of keeping the original square from which they was created. It can go back to that. So
That thumbtack though.
yeah, I saw this show of Sam Gilliam at the St. Louis Art Museum, and I saw it was installed with thumbtacks. Sam Gilliam is a very important abstract painter and who I admire, and his work was hung through using thumbtacks, and
Mm.
so I kind of brought that
It's good. It's good action there.
brought it in.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, it adds that otherworldly action for sure.
Do you wanna talk about how your show with Dragon Crab Turtle came up?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so the show at Dragon Crab Turtle, that show was pretty spontaneous. It was another show during COVID, which I had a studio visit with the gallerist there, who's in St. Louis, which is Catherine Bernhardt, who's a painter as well. And now we just did a studio visit, and she was like, "Yeah, like we want to show this work here."
Mm.
And so I had this culmination of these canvases that kind of came about what really early. I mean, these works were like super early in my practice. These are works that kind of like like kind of had in the show, and in my just because like I said, I was in my studio making this work during a certain time, and it was really interesting because I was just this work is some of this work is also from Coca,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of goes back to that idea of the work and how some of these works, these quote unquote ascending forms, they became part of this exhibition as well. So the floor is a permanent installation by Catherine Bernhardt in St. Louis. So that's part of the show too, you know, and she kind of found works up there that would, in a way, emphasize or wouldn't detach my work from the floor, which is just like this massive and permanent installation that's there.
Yeah. Not to detract us too far from the point, thanks for sharing that. We have a
Yeah,
comment here in the chat from Software for Girls. She actually wrote this right before we're talking about Sam. It said, "Would love to hear Vaughn's thoughts on Sam Gilliam and if he's influenced you. If you've already covered it, never mind." But then you mentioned Sam briefly, and she says, "OMG, that timing." But I wanted to just provide you a little bit more space if you wanted to share some of the connections that you feel or some of the influence that you've garnered from Sam Gilliam's work.
definitely. Yeah, I think his practice was quite large, quite heavy as far as my being inspired by the work as well. There are also I just have a people that inspire me. There are a lot of artists that inspire me as well. I mean, I remember when I was at Webster, I would look over this Eva Hess. I would always rent this book from Webster's library, and totally there was something about Eva Hess's like formalism that always was always really enjoyed the repetition of her forms. So Eva Hess in her work and her post minimalist abstractions,
Mm-hmm.
those are really quite important to me. But I'm also always been really very much interested in this in video and digital work, which is like quite something I'm totally painting right now. But
Mm-hmm.
it's always kind of interesting. You can't, I guess, I can't choose my inspirations, in that way, So artists like Martine Sims is like she's quite always been is a very amazing artist who really inspires me as well. So yeah, but I think Sam Gilliam is really amazing because he worked to scale. He really showed, in my opinion, what the scale that a painter could achieve in his practice,
Mm-hmm.
which is always quite something to look up to as far as that concern. And it's really cool when I see Sam Gilliam's work in museums. I feel like his work always fits. Like Sam Gilliam made that work, which he kept so much of himself in the work, so much of him, the artist Sam Gilliam, is in the work, but also every time you see it in a museum, there's a different movement, which is there, which is really cool. It really speaks really well to the malleability. He really speaks well to the malleability and what painting can be based upon the malleability of it as well. So
Great.
yeah, he's really quite interesting.
Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, obviously influence is important. Uh,
Yeah.
we grow as painters through being able to process these works that came before us, and there's that whole quote of like standing on the shoulders of giants,
Mm.
which I think is a totally fair play.
Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, there's a it's really cool because I think being an artist is really cool because there's always this history that we look at. There's always someone to be inspired by. There's always something to look to. There's always you can get very close to the artist just by looking at their work and just by even attempting to look through their plane. Even attempting to in a way like make work to follow them. I think
Mm.
that's I think that's really quite amazing. It's like a history lesson, and there's not yeah, I think painting's really great for that. I think the art making practice is just like really amazing for that. Being creative is yeah, it's all history in motion.
One thing when I think about Ava Hess's work is that uh, with the materiality of her work, it's a big kind of conservation and archival issue right now with those latex works and
Mm-hmm.
the degradation of that material. Something that we've talked about personally, but I think is important to bring up here is you are really considering the archival nature of these works as you move forward in your practice? Would
Now
you
I
agree?
am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not some of these that we're showing here,
New
right?
new problems, new problems.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, yeah. Like this work here, I'm thinking about painting and learning how to paint in the journey up into that, in the journey of this use of deconstruction in my practice. I feel like some of the earlier works that I have, or some of the earlier works that I created, that even don't exist anymore because I just put clay on raw canvas,
Mm. Yeah.
and so that was back when I was practicing a bit of ceramics at Webster, and that was part of my learning, was this attempting to learn the processes of clay and just like and unlearning. So a lot of early work is just quite quite naive in the way that I made them. And I think I think that is something that's is really important to me, is like continually learning and kind of unlearning as well, like learn something to unlearn it. I think that's definitely part of my practice. So as far as this, a lot of these earlier works would, even this work here, this is an aluminum enamel on the canvas, and it's just kind of put onto the canvas with minimal fixative. I call this work Hammerhead. That's the name of that work there.
Yeah, I was a fan of this this metallic when it was happening. There were some bigger works here. We've got a comment here in the chat from Tomas, and it reads, "Hey Vaughn, I'm curious to know your feelings about the balance between spontaneity and control when you make your pieces. For instance, if you're using a water hose to paint versus using a blade, the first one seems like it could produce unintentional results. When that happens, do you ever not like the outcomes and have to start over?" Thanks, Tomas, for the comment there.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. Yeah, I think that's totally part of the. I think that's partially why I paint on two sides of the canvas. I think it's really back to this idea of that the balance of both the spontaneousness and the use of certain systems in the work. The work is, although it's highly specific, I am painting on unprimed canvas, then I tear and or distress it. There are very few variables that I have in place for this work, but within that is where I think I hit the sweet spot when I'm painting, is that, okay, even though I'm painting on unprimed canvas, then I'm tearing it, I'm choosing to use a water hose, or I'm attempting to use multiple blades, or I have multiple colors that I'm using. Typically, I just like, as we can see on this work there, which is behind me, or yeah, even this work on the screen here, the use of the surface is, I never really need to start over. I think that's one of the things as well, which is really important to note. It's really rare that I start over. I just kind of let the process go until it's complete. I guess like I won't settle for the paint not being on the canvas.
Yeah.
I feel like that's I feel like that's tougher for me to not paint, or to not complete anything, than to complete something and not like it. I would just rather complete it and see where it goes, rather than start over.
Mm.
It speaks to me in like the idea of like, filmmakers have like a cutting room floor, like what didn't make it into the scene, and there. It seems to me like maybe there isn't a cutting room floor in some ways. I'm sure there are pieces that are at home that you're like, this one's never going to see the light of day, and maybe because you love it or you hate it, you never know. But and that too, like there are, the pieces are falling. There's like in many of them there's like falling elements. So there's like, to me, I can almost feel like you've like captured the scraps falling in real time, but then now they're suspended in the work in real time within that. So I think that's really interesting to think like your outcomes are kind of being recycled, or just it's just going to get remixed, or whatever kind of word you want to use.
Hmm. Yeah, I think these works they feel like one moment in time for me when they're made, which is really important, because I think, in my opinion, that is how these works are reflecting their time, and the time that they are created, and the time that I'm in right now is that from the beginning to the end, all the all the paint is being mixed upon the canvas. There's very much one time. So these works here, for instance, those are halves of the same whole, actually. So it's not, so these are halves of the same whole in a way. These were actually cut from one, but they were treated as completely separate pieces, completely different things as well.
Yeah. And from one of my observations is that like with the way that you create bodies of work, you specifically, Vaughn, is there are time periods and you've made enough now in any particular time period that they find different types of groupings as well. So like a work might not function well in like the dragon crab turtle space, but it might function well at Julius Caesar in Chicago, for instance. And how like over time the accumulation of those works, even if they in the moment don't hit the mark or in the moment feel like the best thing ever made, that making of the work actually just like doing the work of making the work provides you with like a lot of possibilities with how you can continue to kind of like support your practice moving forward.
Yeah, I think unfiltering that moment between how I feel creatively in my mind versus how I want to feel creatively when I'm making the work. I think that lessening that filter between those two is really important with my practice and just painting and just being able to create something. I think it's okay for every work that an artist makes just not to love that work. It's okay just not to be in love with everything you make. I think that's super important I think just generally for all artists. There's that moment, those moments where you feel naive or you don't feel as confident with the work. Those are feelings, and those are definitely valid. And those are okay to put into the work as well.
I think that really speaks to Rick and I's ethos, certainly too. I think we're very like embrace. If you feel bad, embrace it and think about it and learn from it. There's no reason to shun it by any means. That's great.
Just make first. That's my philosophy. Yeah. Just make first and then figure the rest out.
For sure.
All right. Well, we're coming up on our second break here, if that feels good to you all.
For sure.
Cool.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we're going to take our second break, our final break today. It'll be for 10 minutes. We'll come back and we'll have another 30 minutes of this focused art talk. Vaughn and I will connect across the break and make sure that we round this off nicely and cover anything else that we need to. We've been kind of freestyling though. Shout out to that freestyle show, the OG freestyle show. So maybe, 2016, Philip Slein. Well, maybe we'll get into that, but who knows? So we're going to take a short 10-minute break here. And thanks for everyone for the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying the time here with us. We do this every Sunday with a different contemporary artist from, the community. So we've got some good guests lined up in the future. If you want to be notified when we go live in the future, just hit that follow button over here on Twitch or subscribe on YouTube, and you'll be notified when we go live. So we're going to take a short 10-minute break, and over the break, you will watch again our commercial for everything. Maybe it gets older. Maybe there's lots of people here who haven't seen it yet. So this will be kind of showcasing some of the other shows that we have here on the travel agency. We will see you soon. Hello, we're here. Welcome. My producer got me some, foundation across the break, so I had to cut down on a little bit of shine. The air conditioner in our house is really loud, and I don't want that sound, for the archive of this video. So, this is the kind of sacrifices I make for you all in your ears. Is that, now I'm a professional. I turn the air conditioner off and put some foundation on, and we're just slowly turning into news anchors, which it's actually kind of creepy sometimes when I watch the news. They look like too real. You guys ever get that vibe? Like, have y'all watched like 4K news in the last year?
Especially local news.
Local news, like 4K local news in the last year.
I don't think in 4K. I don't think I have a. anything 4K compatible at this point.
You can
I
see
don't
into
know.
their souls, like
I'm sure. Yeah.
they, they're doing everything they can to differentiate themselves. Two
Yeah.
versus
I think
four versus five.
I'm watching us over here. I think we look good and soft. We're
Yeah.
looking just right, just right.
Yeah, we don't need the poor
Yeah.
cam.
Yeah, no, we're clean but soft for sure, for sure.
Welcome back, y'all.
Thanks.
Back to the show. My brief aside. I think the local news is a really strange spot to be.
Mm.
So yeah, we kind of run the gamut of a lot of the recent shows. But I do think, let me pull up some other things here. So one of the one of the things that we didn't talk about at all is for a while there you didn't have any work being shown, Vaughn, and then it seemed like all of a sudden, like, oh, now Vaughn's work is like everywhere all at once. And I thought that was like really impressive. It was like no shows, and then there were, I think, like three or four concurrent exhibitions. Is that right?
Yeah, there were. Yeah, exactly. There was 3 solo shows, then a couple group shows actually. So yeah, they all, it's kind of like I couldn't choose when it rained, and it kind of poured during that
For
time.
sure.
So it wasn't
And
intentional?
no, it wasn't. I think it was just how all the communication just happened with the different spaces, and
Mm.
and I think just the way I practice, I think typically is I'll just make the work.
Mm-hmm.
They work here. Yeah, so that's actually now that works here in San Francisco. So
Oh,
what you're seeing behind me here, this work there, that work actually this is the reverse side
okay.
of it.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that we're seeing. So
Nice.
that's really important. There's like talking again about that it's like a whole nother work on the other side. I was like very indecisive that day.
Yeah. I think I saw this one when it was in your studio because we were talking about the line work on it, like the more like linear marks as kind of like a newer space for exploration.
Yeah, this work together was like definitely an inspiration. I mean, getting into spray painting. This is one of those works, one of those earlier works where I was interested in that another mark. I'm actually getting into the mark making and finding myself into the mark making practice and really I was really getting into painting. I think here now I'm really a lot more into the surface. I feel like this work is reading as expressionism.
Mm.
It's reading as abstract expressionism much more here instead of the monochromatic, just like washes that were mostly compile this work. I think making these linear marks for me, um, I was I was always so interested in I would tear the work and that was the mark, the tear being the mark instead of the spray paint can, that being the mark or the brush that being the mark. I was always so interested just purely in that tear. But I think here it was really kind of nice because I took a break from that and I just started painting and I spent a lot more time on the canvas and just like putting the paints on the canvas during this time.
Mm.
Mm.
I see. And this is your show at Monaco here in
Yeah,
St. Louis,
I think we have
Missouri.
more images. Hmm.
Yes,
Yeah,
there are. Hmm. And you are a member at Monaco?
yeah, I am.
That's good.
Yeah, working out of St. Louis, so it's really cool. Yeah, it's really cool it's the beauty in it is that the memberships are always evolving there, which is really great. We have it's always more. Yeah, the rotation of the memberships is really amazing there. Everyone's an artist, or some of us are not artists, or we're working within any parts of the creative field. Everyone's a strength within the group. So.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think that for some reason I'm not able to navigate through these images at the moment, so I apologize for
That's
that.
cool. Yeah, that's the cover page. Yeah, and that show is called Severance, which is
Mm.
again is talking about these. The title once again is that literal and conceptual, right? It's very very little. The severance is the like once again talking about based off of a like severance check or like being the money that you get at the end of your job and
Mm.
thinking. I was thinking through how the current times as well is like that severance, right? Of like when COVID hit and
Mm.
everyone lost their job or laid off, or thinking about that idea of that last, or that space between the periods um, of people's life and their living. So once again, I'm literally adding the vocabulary to these works, and attempting to put them closer to the actual mark that I'm making on the canvas. So I'm really attempting to expand this process, expand my quite literal process of tearing canvas, but expanding the vocabulary that I use around it.
Mm. Yeah, so this is an install shot here. We have some that are fully on the floor, and
Yeah.
not as distressed as lots of the other works.
Wow.
Yeah, they are. So I was for this space, I was really interested in those bringing it back to the floor, because during that when these works were created, they're typically on the floor. There's a really interesting image of like Jackson Pollock. He's like
Mm.
on the ground, or you'll see like Jack Whitten, and he's like he's like on the ground painting these canvases. Or you see like Helen Frankenthaler, and she's like
Yeah.
on her paintings are like on the
And she's
ground.
like sitting
You know,
on the painting itself. I've seen
yeah,
a
yeah.
couple of those images where she's sitting on one of the fields and is painting another new field.
Definitely, right. So I wanted to be a part of that in a way. So I wanted to like put my ceremonially put my canvases on the ground and bring them back to where they were created. I
Mm.
felt like this was a really great space for that. I felt like these works filled the floor really well. I had made these works outside, and they were on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So they're back to the viewing is back to how they were created, but also um, yeah, being part of that lineage was quite important, like the history around the floor painting and how it was being then displayed again when it was completed.
For sure. Oh, and I don't mean to jump back between shows, but I just think it has to be asked with the floor coming up. Dragon Crab Turtle, you said the floor itself was an installation. I wonder, A, did you have any pieces on the floor? And B, since the floor has sort of definitely entered your practice or your expression of your work, how was kind of, potentially being in course with or potentially competing with a floor installation with your work on the wall.
Yeah, the work being at Dragon Crab Turtle and having this giant floor piece, it was. I felt like it was it's quite a lot because in the past, Catherine Bernhardt was able to just fill the space with and that's part of the installation specifically
Love
there, and
that, Valenciaga.
like it's hundreds of square feet, in this space in St. Louis, which
Mm,
we see the idea of reclaiming warehouses in St. Louis, and the idea of it now bringing art to these areas in St. Louis, which weren't known for that, which is bringing really great things to our city. I think, which is really amazing. The the floor work in that space, I think it's definitely something to witness because of it just being able to yeah, I think just the size and the scale of it. I felt like the scale of that floor really made me compete with what kind of work that I wanted to show in that space. Like
yeah.
I think at first, typically what happens when I'm making my canvases is that um, I, they don't fit in the walls of my studio space,
Mm.
because typically if I paint outside when it's in the spring or summertime in St. Louis, which is really great, I'm able to be outside, and I bring the work inside, and it always fills my studio space. Just like because when I'm outdoors, I can expand much more, much larger. So
Mm,
So
for
did
sure.
did you just happen to be wearing the Balenciagas that day, or did Catherine ask you to make sure to kit up with the Balenciagas?
yeah, I just like happen to have those on during that time.
Let's
Yeah.
And I'm
go.
walking
That lifestyle.
That's the question everybody wants to know.
Yes. Yeah, chat's blowing up over here. Those shoes, the shoes though. Yeah. What are those? Well, and it's funny too, and I don't mean to belabor the point of the floor, but every floor has a personality of any art space, whether it's completely just concrete or if it's wood. Like I think about Slam, like when I'm walking through the contemporary space, St. Louis Art Museum. There's certain places where if you step, it makes a loud sound. There's like those metal grates that go across, and whether or not I'm interpreting is that compared. I'm kind of trained my brain to not look at the floor necessarily, whereas this having installation of the floor is something that actually I think after your first go through, you could kind of turn your brain off of that and be like, well, I know that this will be here, but what's over here, and that's not. It's always going to be in again kind of in chorus or in competition. So I'm curious too. Then to me, I hadn't seen those Monaco images yet of the pieces on the floor. So that's like shocking to me, and I'm glad this is happening in real time, so I can do this for the show. It's good content, as me and Rick talk about. But what brought you? I mean, you definitely discussed it. It's kind of part of your practice, but I mean, it feels like there's like this element of like I'm gonna give you all a little extra something. Like, yes, here's this new work, but I'm gonna give you something that like it almost, not that you're unsure of it, but it feels like here's a little taste of the future in this current moment too. At the same time, like I could see you exploring the floor forever in so many different ways. I'm curious your thoughts on that part of the process.
Yeah, I think that detail is really really interesting because it's happening here, and it's also the show here in San Francisco as well. What's happening is that there's a work that really long strip work that we went over as well
Right.
that is cresting the floor. I've always had a really interesting relationship, I think, with the floor because of its making, but also what I'm really interested in is this idea, looking forward of the installation. But also, I think the floor is really interesting because it's this thing that we don't we just breeze past. I think
Yeah,
it's this thing
absolutely.
that of course that we it's this like the ground we move on. I think in the attempts to humanize these paintings, the interaction with the floor, even though the interaction with the floor is stagnant, right? The work is just sitting here or cresting here, like barely cresting the ground, or if they are laying flat on the ground. That relationship with the floor is, I think, my attempt to humanize these works as well.
Mm.
Absolutely.
We do have some photos of your process too that you shared,
Cool.
that we can look at kind of inside of this context. And yeah, as you said, the making is taking place horizontally. Would you say that most of the painting takes place on the ground and most of the cutting, ripping, and tearing takes place on the wall?
Yeah, I would say so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting seeing this photo here because this piece looks completely different
Yes,
now
it's incredible.
than this image, or this piece would have looked so different. I'm actually attempting to see when this work, because back to a question earlier about the use of the water, I would have went in with the water hose after this.
Uh-huh.
If I can, and so a lot of these lines would have been so much more muttered over when it's completed than a lot of these harsh those spray marks. And I really for a while got into using this thing called a paint striper, which is used as a industrial material. And in most of its practice is this industrial material called the paint striper that was used to paint the lines on the ground outside.
Mm.
So I went. It's used to paint the ground. So I put this canvas on the ground, then use this paint striper over the canvas to get those very harsh marks that are seen there. But once again, I'm mixing the paint on the ground. All this is happening without a palette. I'm not mixing. I'm not pre-mixing any paint. It's straight out of the tube with the sponges, with the paint striper, and with the water hose. So there's this idea of I'm giving myself these colors, this yellow, this green, this teal, this orange, and these are the colors that I'm working with, and these are the tools that I'm working with,
Mm.
and now I just like kind of go for it,
Mm.
So
I have to say the color striper I thought was a very small lawnmower for a second. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh wow, that's how he's cutting it with that. Okay, cool.
There is some really nicely manicured grass in the background of this photo.
There really is.
Looks very
That's
nicely manicured.
makes sense.
Yeah, a couple
Wow.
more of those. Yeah, this is. So, would you consider these like underpaintings?
yeah, that's an underpainting. That's the first. That's like the very first side of a canvas, and that's the underpainting to
These are some deep
yeah.
cuts, Vaughn. No pun intended.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen any of this process, and
That
uh,
blue would have covered this really dark. That would have covered all of that. I mean, that wouldn't have all those deep cuts there, those lines, those really heavy spray lines. That all would have been they all would have been covered. I mean,
Mm.
that it just we won't even see this or wouldn't have even seen that if it were to be seen.
Mm.
Wow,
Yeah, only at that time.
for sure.
Yeah, thanks for like kind of, revealing the curtain. Look at that concrete.
Yeah.
History there, right? You think
Yes.
maybe
You're
Catherine
not
will,
getting that deposit back.
yeah.
I don't know if that's a rental or not, but yeah.
That's something that I think we talked about too is in your studio that like that's something that you have to consider is the way that like if you're making in the studio it impacts the floor and being able to repaint it or bring it back to a natural state. I think we can see lots of history on this concrete pad here. Is this where you've made lots of paintings on this concrete pad?
Yeah, I have. These were made outside,
Okay.
but now in my studio, indoors, yeah, the floor has gone through quite a change. Yeah, I remember the floors being pristine when I went there, and the studio that I'm renting in St. Louis, they were quite pristine there, and now it's that concrete now has absorbed many of my artworks. Much of the paint is now stuck to those floors. So one day that'll be a work in and of itself. Or before I leave, I'm just gonna I'll have to paint over it or somehow.
Excavate it. Just
Yeah.
get a
You have to take it with
concrete
you.
saw. Yeah.
You got to take it with you.
Let's just
Rick, I know we're kind of coming up on our questions. Should we jump to the Julius Caesar thing real quick? I don't mean to
yeah.
hurry this part up. I'm really enjoying this.
I was just gonna flip through
No,
these.
please. Oh my God, incredible.
Studio shot. That was when the studio was at its most maximal. This is like the moments before I sent the work here. Actually, in this shot here, you can see a work that is here at Rummer Young Gallery right now. So this work that's behind me is actually one of the works in the show. Yeah, and but also this work was at one of the works in the shot also was at the Monaco Gallery. Another work that I can see here is actually at Rummer Young Gallery out here in San Francisco, which is quite cool. This image is pretty important because this is like right before the outtake of the work, right before I sent the work everywhere. This is how I was just seeing the work. This is how I was just in my studio on the daily.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting to see them in such proximity to one another, just so close, like so tight.
It's incredible.
And yeah, let's just wrap up this part of the conversation with the other things that are going on. Jake, um, you mentioned Julius Caesar. Vaughn, you have a piece at Julius Caesar in Chicago right now. That's correct.
Yeah, we do.
And that's a collaboration between Monaco and Julius Caesar.
Awesome. Yeah, we're here. Nice one.
Yeah. So we see this one here. This was also in your show at Monaco. Is that correct? This was kind of by the reception desk at Monaco.
Oh, very close. Actually, it's not the same work.
Oh wow.
It's another very early monochromatic work. That's yellow. It's only on one. Only also painted on one side.
Mhm.
There. So this piece is called "So What." It's actually a very early work in my practice. One of the works that actually kind of began the practice.
Hmm.
This is work that I have that's like part of like my me personally at the moment. Because to me, it is part of the inception of this practice,
Mhm.
because it is painted with yellow ochre, which is just it's this pigment that comes out of the ground. It's a natural pigment that was used typically for clay bodies, to when you make a clay or when you make a glaze. Those are the times that you would see this pigment typically used here. So this piece, which at some point I was even now I'm very much inspired by I was very much inspired by jazz music and this idea of what it was, and connecting freestyle jazz music and connecting music to abstraction, and literally within the process of these works. So very early on, I used a song by Miles Davis, which is like the very famous jazz musician Miles Davis. I titled it after that song.
Okay. Mm.
Yeah, so this is very much different than the work we even seen than the work that we've seen so far, because this one is actually very early
Yeah.
in my practice. I really had no kind of barometer, or I had no kind of compass as to where the work was going when I made this work. This work is like very intuitive. It's very early. There's like not even really that much painting that's happening here. It's just the ochre on the canvas.
Yeah. Very
I mean,
cool.
it's like jazz. I mean, it's intuition. You know, it's coming from a carnal space almost. Just like I need to do this now because I feel the energy. It's very energetic for sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's coming up for you, the other show, is that at Abattoir?
That's coming up very soon.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's up with that? I don't see any documentation yet on their website, but you did mention that you
yeah.
have a group exhibition coming up with Abattoir. Is that how you say it?
Definitely. Yep, exactly. Yeah, we
Okay.
have a group exhibition coming up there, and also the show here in San Francisco at Romer Young. We're extending that
Oh yeah.
for another couple of weeks as well, which would be that's very exciting. And the show at Julius Caesar is also being extended as well now. So look out for
Oh,
programming
yeah.
and other things like that coming up soon with those exhibitions.
Yeah, so that's, if you're in Cleveland, if you're in San Francisco, if you're in Chicago, definitely have an opportunity to see Vaughn's work.
Mm.
Okay, great. Well, I feel like
Yeah,
we could talk about that. We could talk about your work probably for like another 3 hours if we
yes.
needed to. But thank you so much for sharing these takes and being in conversation with us and giving us the behind the scenes too. I think that's something that not isn't always present and what artists are wanting to share about their process and in their work. And I felt like those process photos that you sent over were really revealing and kind of vulnerable. So really appreciate you sending those over.